Hello and welcome to Touchdown Tuesdays. I am Ian DeMars with my co-host Ryan Solomon. And Ryan, I believe we have a special guest with us this week, do we?
Yep. Yep. So I brought my brother Derek Solomon, who is a singer, songwriter, and avid Wisconsin and NFL sports fan. So, Derek, why don't you say hi to all the listeners?
Hey, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Excited to be here with you guys today.
Yeah, and we had a pretty exciting week of football this past week. Of course, Thanksgiving was around, so we got to see some extra football this past week on Thursday. But we also saw some teams that are finally starting to hit their breaking point this season. I think the first team we should definitely start with has to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars lost their seventh straight game this past Sunday on the road, this time to the Buffalo Bills in a game that I would say had the opportunity to win. As a result, we did see them make some changes. We saw offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett get fired. And then a couple hours later, we saw Blake Bortles was officially benched in favor of Cody Kessler. And then later on in the day, they had some worse news as Leonard Fournette was suspended for one game. So, Ryan and Derek, what are you guys' thoughts on what is happening with the Jaguars? And is this just kind of a sign of how this season's been going on?
Yeah, when you think about where they were last year at this point in time compared to now, it's really pretty crazy because they did not have a whole lot change on their roster except for losing a couple of wide receivers. And even at the start of this season, this team looked like they were poised to make a playoff run, possibly make a Super Bowl run, because, like I said, they had all the pieces in place. They had Jalen Ramsey, they had that Saxonville defensive line, and they had Blake Bortles, which you kind of thought was like, at least he's a starter who's been somewhat dependable. Sure, he turns the ball over a lot, but it's not that big of a deal, I suppose. But this team has just gone down the tubes as the season's progressed. It's been blaming each other. The defense has blamed the offense. The defense has played poorly in a lot of games. And now it all culminated with a loss to Buffalo, the firing of the defense or offensive coordinator, and then Blake Bortles being sat. So this has just turned into a complete dumpster fire. And a lot of people on ESPN are pointing to the fact that they didn't get a better quarterback earlier in the season or in the offseason as to why this team isn't doing well. And I'm sure that would have helped had they had a different quarterback, but it looks like this team also just has some fundamental issues that they are not able to overcome in spite or partly due to Blake Bortles. But even with a better quarterback, I don't think this team would be playoff bound.
I think what makes it even worse is just despite all the other issues they have, you had that big fight break out with Fournette getting ejected. It's just kind of that when it rains, it pours thing where when everything is going wrong, it's just this big implosion. And so I think a lot of the times things get worse when the coach is kind of wishy-washy on their starting quarterback. And so I think that's a real locker room divider when it's not, this is our guy, or, we need to find somebody else. When it's kind of like, oh, well, he might be the guy. Like, I feel like that's something that really separates the locker room and just is not a good recipe for success.
Yeah, and if you look at that team, I mean, the way they are right now, even if they win out the rest of the games, that puts them at 8-8, which technically still keeps them somewhat in the playoff hunt. But as of right now, they're 3 games out of the playoff hunt. It just seems like they're at that point where the season's basically over the dome. It's kind of at that point where they need to look to possibly draft another quarterback. I know there are some bigger names in the draft this year. There's Justin Herbert, Will Greer, and there's also Drew Lock that could be potential first-time quarterbacks. But obviously, this quarterback draft isn't as stacked as last year's draft. So, unfortunately, that's something that they did miss out on, and it could be hurting them for the next couple of years.
What do you think about Bortles as far as his career in the NFL? Do you think this is about it for him, or do you think he's going to get a shot elsewhere, maybe another spot in Jacksonville, or do you think this is kind of it?
I don't think he's getting another shot in Jacksonville. I think that they're going to let him go, and he's going to wind up on some roster. Like, if you look at the level of backup quarterbacks out there, like Nathan Peterman was starting at some point this year.
Yeah.
So I would think Blake Bortles would find a spot on the roster. I would take him in Green Bay as a backup quarterback instead of Deshaun Kaiser. What I think the Jaguars should do is they should get themselves a veteran quarterback that can play next year, one that can manage the game, doesn't turn the ball over. You could go Tyrod Taylor. You could go Eli Manning. You have some options out there.
Do you really think Eli's going to leave?
Yes.
Do you think so?
Yes, I do. And then draft a young quarterback that you can groom well. Jacksonville is still having a chance to win with a veteran. And then hopefully by the time that veteran isn't playing so well anymore, you can let the rookie take over.
Yeah,
I think Favre is still available if they want to.
Favre will always be available.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough call for Jacksonville because as much as it makes sense to get rid of Blake Bortles, he did just sign a big extension this past offseason. I believe it was a 3-year, $54 million extension that he and Jacksonville agreed to. So if they were to let him go, that means they're giving up a lot of money that they'd still be owing him, which means it could be tough to possibly get a veteran quarterback.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, they really – it was surprising they gave him that extension. I will put that out there first. And now they're sort of stuck with them to the degree that they would have to get a veteran quarterback for pretty much dirt cheap if they wanted to not have Blake Bortles starting.
I mean, he was the guy, though, right? He was their future. And so are you surprised they're giving up on him at this point? Or do you think it's time?
I mean, you look at Blake Bortles, you look at his record, not necessarily that good of a record. I believe he's well over 20 games under 500. He's up there record-wise in Jacksonville history in regards to passing yards and touchdowns. You look at the fact that they've only made one playoff appearance, and you look at some of the factors that could have been an issue this year is a lack of depth at wide receiver. There's been numerous injuries on defense and on the offensive line, so that could play into factor. But I just think they're at that point where they know their season's over. They kind of have to reevaluate going into next year. And I think the offense was part of that. But they have to try and get some playmakers on offense because if you only have Leonard Fournette and a good offensive line, you're not going to get much done.
This is true. But let's go to another team in the AFC that at the start of the year had some playoff aspirations, and now it looks like their season is over too, and that is the Cincinnati Bengals. So they started out 4-1 and then had a couple of bad losses, and now they are, I believe it's below 500 now. They're 5-6, I want to say. And Andy Dalton was just placed on IR with torn ligaments in his thumb, meaning that Jeff Driscoll will probably be the starter the rest of the way. So I guess the big question here for the Bengals is, does this mean it is finally it for Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati?
Well, looking at it, a lot of people were surprised that Marvin Lewis came back last year. You look at the start he had this year, it kind of made it seem like he was saving his job. But you look at what's happened these last few weeks. The defense continues to play terrible football. The offense hasn't looked the same since the A.J. Green incident. And now you're looking at a quarterback. Your quarterback is out for the year. I mean, I think it's a sign that it's time for them to move on from Marvin Lewis. He hasn't really had too much success with them in regards to moving on in the playoffs. We've seen the Bengals, they've got to the playoffs numerous times before, but they can never get past that first game. So they need to get a coach that can build their roster and try and get them further into the playoffs. Yes, they play in a tough division, but they have to try and get some sort of success. So, yeah, they have Jeff Driscoll for the rest of the year. They did claim Tom Savage off of waivers this week from, I believe it was the San Francisco 49ers. So they have another experienced quarterback on the roster. But this team is still talented offensively. They got Joe Mixon, Giovanni Bernard, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd. So you have some playmakers. So if they're able to at least keep close in games as long as the defense can improve, which, I mean, it's tough to ask for them to improve since we've seen them give up outrageous point margins over to the Cleveland Browns and to the New Orleans Saints. But, I mean, they're playing in the AFC and you're only a game out of a playoff spot. It's kind of hard to say that they're done, but I think it is the end of Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati.
If it is the end for him, who do you see as a good fit for replacing him?
I mean, I feel like they have to go defensive if they do want to do that. I mean, it's kind of tough looking at who defensively you would want to go after. Obviously, there's some defensive coordinators you could go after. Honestly, I would not be surprised if maybe they could go after a former AFC North coach in Mike Penn. Take him away from Green Bay after 1 year. You've seen Green Bay's improved a little bit on defense. They've had some inconsistency and injuries, but if Cincinnati sees enough in how Mike Penn changed them, it won't surprise me if they try to go after.
I mean, there aren't really a lot of candidates this year that you see as definitely leaving. Like in the past, there's been a lot of coaches that you say, okay, that coordinator looks like they're going to move on to bigger and better things. So, Mike Vrabel was one of those guys. Matt Patricia was one of those guys. You could even see one of these high-profile college coaches perhaps making the jump to the NFL because this is kind of leading into our next question too, is that there's going to be some coaches that are getting fired this year, and there's going to be open spots. And one of those guys might just be Mike McCarthy of the Green Bay Packers. So, Ian, why don't you tell everyone about the Packers?
So, yeah, they had another tough game this week. I mean, it seemed like they had an opportunity to get a big win. They've had chances numerous weeks these past few weeks. Unfortunately, all of these opportunities have come on the road, and they just can't win on the road. And we complained about Mike McCarthy a couple weeks ago not wanting to go for it on fourth down late in the game. And then what did we see this Sunday? They actually did go for a fourth down. It was a little earlier than we expected, but they went for it and they didn't get it. So now some people are saying, well, why did they go for it? And, I mean, at this point, McCarthy's been at the Packers for I believe it's 13 years now. He's only gotten one Super Bowl. They've had some success in the playoffs, but they've only gone to one Super Bowl. They need to get some more playmakers on offense. They're at that point where they're trying to build with young talent, which is something you have to do in the NFL. But we saw them get rid of Jordy Nelson, and we see Jordy Nelson now isn't having too much success, is basically on the verge of retirement. But some of these young guys, they're not going to be impact players right away, especially when you draft some of these guys in the 4 to 7 round, which we see from Moore, Valdez-Scantling, and St. Brown. They need to get some sort of playmaker offensively. They obviously need to stay healthy, but this is just a sign that they have to get. It's the end of the McCarthy era. They need to move on from him. We saw the new GM started clearing house a little bit, getting rid of some of these big name guys that Ted Thompson brought in. So I think it's time we have to do. It's not a rebuild. It's kind of just you're taking some of the older pieces out and filling them in with experience. So
it's not a rebuild; it's a remodel.
Yeah, that's the word. They need to remodel because if you rebuild with Aaron Rodgers, then you're not going to win another Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. You need to remodel with him still there, and then once it gets to like it's the last 1 to 2 years of his career, then if you're not winning, get the rebuild going. But right now, with Aaron Rodgers still good for, I would say, at least 5 years, you got to remodel.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's lacking is just that veteran experience. Because I remember in some of the years when we were playing really well, we brought in Charles Woodson, we brought in Julius Peppers, and we had some of those guys who were really seasoned, and I think they helped lead the team. But right now it just feels like a bunch of rookies kind of with other rookies, and then Clay Matthews is there getting penalties. So it's just kind of this mix of rookies and young players that don't necessarily know what they're doing. And then you can see the frustration, especially with Rodgers just on routes and stuff. But he's also not firing on all cylinders. We saw that pass that he missed to Devontae Adams where he was basically wide open. And so I think the consensus is that obviously something's not working. And I think, kind of the scapegoat for that, the easy pick is just, let's fire McCarthy and maybe that'll, fix something. At least make some of the fans feel like something's happening.
But if you look at the best coaches in the NFL right now, if you look at like the top 4 teams, you have Andy Reid in the Chiefs. He's a great coach. You have Sean McVay in Los Angeles, who apparently is a great coach. You have Bill Belichick, and you have Sean Payton. So, like, these guys are all coaches that have been phenomenal in the NFL. And then you look at McCarthy, and as opposed to scheming ways to get players open, opposed to scheming ways to give offenses on the opposing team fits, it seems like he's botching the play clock. It looks like there's such a big gap between these best coaches in the NFL and Mike McCarthy. And I think any of these coaches that I just listed, if they had Aaron Rodgers, they would have at least 3 Super Bowls by now. And it seems like McCarthy did a good job coming in and changing the culture initially when the transition occurred from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. But now we need somebody that's actually a real football mind. I'd say McCarthy was more of a kind of vanilla, hard-nosed kind of guy, and that's just not what gets it done anymore. You need a coach who's going to scheme.
Whenever I see the Packers play, I just think that well, first of all, there's always tons of injuries, which is ridiculous. I don't understand how it just – I don't know what the actual numbers are, but it feels like we have the most injuries out of every team every year. But
especially in the secondary.
Yeah, the players just look undisciplined. You know, there's always one major mistake. Like one player will do something really stupid that'll basically kind of cost the game. Or it'll be, you know, just the whole team getting injured. And so it's like, it's very frustrating from a fan perspective to watch it and just kind of you see it all go down and not really have anything to fix it besides maybe changing some people on the coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough because, I mean, with us being big fans of the Packers, so if you look at 5 years ago, a lot of people probably wouldn't be saying that Mike McCarthy is probably going to be gone within 5 years. But at that point, it's looking like it's going to happen. But I think this year in the NFL, we're going to see, I want to say we're going to see probably close to a record number of coaches either get let go or some sort of change in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, that could actually, like, you have to think a lot of those coaches that get fired could get picked up by other teams. Like, if Mike McCarthy gets fired, it wouldn't be terribly surprising, a Super Bowl winning coach to be hired by some other team, you know, like, or Marvin Lewis, like a seasoned coach, maybe just needs a change of scenery. So, like we were saying, there's not a whole lot of high-profile candidates. Maybe there actually are a lot of high-profile candidates. They're just not available yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we'll have to keep an eye out for. We've seen some coaches get fired already in season. Would not surprise me if we do see another one or two before the end of the season. But let's move on to our question of the week. So with Thanksgiving being last week, we had tweeted and put out on Facebook a question in regards to a couple of teams that basically play every year on Thanksgiving, and it's about the Lions and the Cowboys. And the question was, of those teams, which one of them makes you think more of Thanksgiving football? And looking at the results, Twitter was unanimous. Everyone on Twitter said that the Lions made them think of Thanksgiving Day football. On Facebook, it was a little more split. Lions had a 64 to 36% advantage when it comes to being more reminded about Thanksgiving football. Would you guys agree that you think of the Lions more when it comes to Thanksgiving?
100%. I think it's just because, at least in the games I remember, they're normally the first game. And so it's just kind of like, you know, you wake up, you're excited for football. That's the first thing that's on. And it's kind of, I really like it when they wear the, you know, just the like silver helmet throwbacks. And, you know, I think especially being in the Midwest, since they sometimes play the Packers, that's more what we're focused on is, the Packers play on Thanksgiving. And then it's, you know, normally the Lions. And so I think that probably has a big effect on us here. If we're, you know, surveying more out in the West, people would probably, you know, hop on board more with Dallas. But
that's a good point, Derek, especially because from a time perspective, like our family always had Thanksgiving as kind of like a Thanksgiving lunch sort of thing. So it'd be like you get the food ready, you sit down and eat, then while you're eating, the football game started. After you're done, you go sit in front of the TV and watch the Lions usually lose. Yeah. Like that's just traditional. And it was like the first thing that you would see after you ate. So you're kind of in a coma. And then by the time that Cowboys game comes on, you're like, okay, I want to go throw the football around now. So it's like that was what you were focused on more was that Lions game. And then the Cowboys were kind of like an afterthought when you actually wanted to go out and do stuff.
Also, from a historical perspective, the Lions were the first team to have that consistent Thanksgiving game. And it was just because like no one was coming to their games. And so they made a deal to have that game on Thanksgiving, and it got like nationally broadcast, and then, you know, kind of became that tradition. And so, and then the Cowboys did it later on, but it was more of they weren't getting people to come to their games, and it was kind of a reluctant, like, oh, well, we could try this kind of thing. And so the Lions definitely have the older tradition there if we're looking from a historical standpoint.
The Lions finally beat somebody else in a competition.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you guys on that. I know typically what happens in my family is typically we go up to my cabin and watch the Lions lose, eat Thanksgiving, so basically miss a decent portion of that Cowboys game. So
definitely would agree that the Lions are the main focal team that make you think of Thanksgiving since they are the first game as well. So,
unfortunately, they didn't have the best Thanksgiving. A pick six late in that game cost them a game against the Bears. We saw Ezekiel Elliott and Amari Cooper go off for the Cowboys and win against the Redskins. And then we saw Drew Brees threw 4 touchdowns to 4 guys who you really didn't know of played in the NFL, and their win over the Falcons. But overall, I would definitely say the quality of Thanksgiving games were pretty solid this year compared to the last couple of years.
They were somewhat close, which was different than usual. Is that they were down to 1 or 2 possessions. The Cowboys game was sort of boring. I don't know. The Lions game was the best of them, but the quarterback play in those games weren't spectacular either.
So let's move on to our next topic. So we saw the Baltimore Ravens won again this week with Lamar Jackson at their quarterback, and their head coach, it's John, right? John Harbaugh?
Yeah.
Okay, so John Harbaugh has not yet announced who his quarterback will be for this upcoming week's game. It'll either be Lamar Jackson again or Joe Flacco coming off of a hip injury. Who do you guys think will be starting this week?
I think that it's going to be Lamar Jackson again this week. And the reason I say that is he's led them to 2 straight wins now, so you have that momentum rolling. And there's really no reason to put Joe Flacco in right now. It depends on where they're going for the future. So if they see that Flacco is still their future quarterback, then you can put Flacco in and you can say, okay, lead us to the playoffs, Joe. If you think it's Lamar Jackson and he's playing well, there's no point in taking him out right now. And then if he finishes the rest of the year and takes you to the playoffs, then you have an easy way to say, all right, Joe, we don't really need you anymore. We're not going to re-sign you. So I think that might be the game plan going forward, is see how Lamar Jackson is. If Lamar Jackson takes them to the playoffs, then it's an easy decision moving forward. If they put Joe Flacco in now and Joe Flacco takes them to the playoffs, then all of a sudden you have a quarterback controversy for possibly the next 3 years.
Yeah, Derek, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I would say that you got to look at the quality of the wins here with the teams that the Ravens have beaten with Lamar Jackson. I mean, it's not really it's not like they beat New England or something like that, where it was like, Lamar Jackson came and fought back and, took the win out of the jaws of defeat kind of thing.
They played 2 of the worst defenses in the NFL.
Exactly.
The Bengals and the Raiders.
Right. But when you have a guy who's been quarterback and they've won a couple games in a row, I don't think as a coach you have a reason to take him out. But I also kind of thought that when Tampa was playing and you had the whole Jameis Winston, Ryan Fitzpatrick thing, and they were kind of on a roll with Fitzpatrick, and then they put Winston in. But it's kind of the reversed roles where, you have the veteran guy who's out and the younger guy's in for him, where it was reversed with Tampa. But I think Jackson plays again this week. If he does good, I say they're going to stick with him. If he doesn't, you might see Flacco again.
They have some tougher matchups coming up after this Falcons game. So the week after they have the Chiefs, and then in 4 weeks they have the Chargers, which those 2 games could end up being pivotal to their playoff chances. So I think that this Falcons game could be kind of a barometer to see whether Lamar Jackson is actually ready to take this team to the next level. And I think they're going to judge from there whether he's the quarterback versus Kansas City. But I think he plays this week.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, I think it makes sense to start Jackson again this week. However, I think if he wins this game, we're kind of going to see a similar effect to what happened with San Francisco a few years ago, where Alex Smith was leading them to some success, then got injured, and then Colin Kaepernick came in and played the lights out. If we can see Lamar Jackson play another solid game this week against the Falcons, does not surprise me if not only he gets his job the rest of the year, but leads them to the playoffs. I think having a dynamic player like him makes that team a little more dangerous than a lot of people think.
It is possible. And speaking of Joe Flacco, though, we were talking about potential veteran quarterbacks that could go to the Jaguars earlier. How about Joe Flacco to the Jaguars?
That could be
that would be quite the improvement.
Yeah, and that would make a lot of sense. You see a quarterback that loses his job and then go to a place where they tend to be a run-heavy team. That's what happened with Alex Smith a few years ago when he went to the Chiefs. They were mainly a run-heavy team, and it helped him prolong his career a little bit. That could definitely be a thing that could happen with Jacksonville. Go with him, strong run game, keeps them in the league a couple years. That would definitely be an intriguing move. Sure.
Yeah. And on the topic of quarterbacks, still, Phillip Rivers set an NFL record and tied an NFL record for completions this past Sunday. And the way that it worked was he tied the record for consecutive completions at 25 and broke the record for consecutive completions to start a game with 25. How impressed are you by this achievement by Phillip Rivers?
It's obviously like a great record. It shows that he was able to put the ball in the right spot and everything. But he also was playing against the Arizona Cardinals. I will give him credit, though, because they were down 10-0 in the game. So he had to work his way back into the game, and he was able to do that. So because of that, I definitely do give props to Phillip Rivers. This is a quarterback, a guy who I definitely think has Hall of Fame caliber numbers. Hasn't gone to a Super Bowl, but he has gone close 1 or 2 times. This could be a year where they have another opportunity as well. They are playing great football. They did lose Melvin Gordon recently to MCL injury. He could be out a couple of weeks. But they are playing great football. They're having their first Sunday night primetime game in 4 years this upcoming week against the Steelers. But I think that this is a good accomplishment for Phillip Rivers, and watch out for the Chargers because they're playing great football.
You say watch out for the Chargers, but 2 weeks ago they lost to the Broncos. So I'm not on that bandwagon yet.
Hey, Broncos just beat the Steelers.
Yeah, but the Chargers beat up on bad teams traditionally this season. They haven't beaten anybody that I would say is really any good, but they're going to get the chance to play the Steelers now. And if they beat the Steelers, I will say the Chargers are a legitimate contender. Until then, I am saying that they are just a pretender who beats up on terrible teams.
Yeah, okay. Derek, did you have any other thoughts on Phillip Rivers and his record and tie-in?
Yeah,
or those Color Rush unis?
I like the unis. I thought they were pretty cool. But first of all, I am 0% impressed with his record because I feel like that's great. You can complete, 25 in a row, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily quality. I mean, Marcus Mariota was fine today. He had at least 17 completions in a row tonight. And, I mean, a lot of them were just these little dunk passes that, you could put me out there and I could just throw it in the flat. I could probably complete at least,
but if you look at it,
row.
He scored 28 points in the second quarter alone. And then another 14 points in the third quarter.
I'm not saying that I wasn't impressed with his performance overall. I'm just talking about this as a record and how we're celebrating.
You're saying
this
it's a fraudulent record.
It's not fraudulent. It definitely means something. I'm just saying I'm not super impressed by it. But I am impressed with the Chargers as a team. And I do think that they're super underrated at the moment. So I'm excited for them to have this primetime chance. And I do think they're going to win. That's my prediction.
That's your bold prediction?
Because I think
save that till later in the show, man.
Rivers he's just been this dude that's kind of behind the scenes who's he's decent, but he's never been that great, leading his team to a Super Bowl or anything. And so that's got to weigh on a quarterback, not feeling like you really have that validation. And so I think this year when they kind of have this momentum and it's all building up and nobody's really talking about them too much except, a few people here and there with these bold predictions of them doing something.
They're everybody's bold prediction, though. You can't say nobody's talking about them. Everybody, if you're like, hey, give me a sneaky team that'll win the Super Bowl, they're like, oh, I got one for you. Los Angeles Chargers.
Okay, but with Los Angeles, with the Fires, they rallied around the Rams. And I was wondering why no one was like, oh, yeah, the LA Chargers, let's rally around our LA team. They just don't get as much attention as other teams. You have to admit that.
I'll give that one to you because the fact that they moved from San Diego to LA and they play in a soccer stadium. And that first year, they couldn't even sell out the soccer stadium, which holds half the size of NFL stadiums.
15, 20 people tops.
Yeah. So I would definitely say they're underrated. I don't think they get as talked about as much as obviously the Rams and obviously other teams in the AFC. But they definitely are a dark horse team and do need to be looked at going forward. But let's move on to some college football talk. So we had We saw some crazy games this past week. We in rivalry week, and now we head to the conference championship week. So we got some big games. We got the Big 12 rematch between Oklahoma and Texas, an interesting Big 10 matchup between Ohio State and Northwestern. We got the big SEC matchup in Alabama and Georgia. I believe the Pac-12, I want to say, is Utah and Washington. So of those big time matchups, also the ACC, I believe, I want to say it's Clemson and Pittsburgh. I'm not for sure on that one. Of those games, which one is going to have the biggest impact this week?
I think you definitely have to look at the Alabama-Georgia matchup. That's a huge one. Clemson, Pittsburgh is another one. I don't think that the Big Ten one is really going to be that much of a factor because I think Ohio State's just going to dominate. And I don't think that's really going to be much of a contest. But Alabama, Georgia is definitely one to watch. If I had to pick one, that'd be the one I'm most interested in. I guess Oklahoma, Texas is another good one.
I was going to say, I think that Oklahoma-Texas matchup is the most interesting one simply because Texas, the lower seeded / ranked team, has already beaten Oklahoma once. So you know that they're capable of it. And it's only a question of whether they're going to be able to do it again or not. If you look at that Alabama-Georgia matchup, I really think that if Georgia somehow found a way to beat Alabama, we would have just ended up with 2 SEC teams.
Yeah, I don't think you could keep either of them out with Alabama's dominance. And if any team beats Alabama, they're going to make it.
So I kind of hope that Georgia just loses to Alabama. I'd really like to see UCF make it. I know that McKenzie Milton is out now, who is their starting quarterback, who was playing very well this year. So they realistically probably are not that great of a team anymore without McKenzie Milton. But I would love to see Oklahoma lose to Texas, Ohio State lose to Northwestern, and then Georgia lose to Alabama and have UCF in the college football playoff because they have not lost for 2 years.
Yeah, and you look at basically what would need to happen in that case, and definitely are possibilities. Georgia would, or I would have to say Alabama wins. If Alabama wins, obviously that would knock Georgia out. So that's one of the key teams because you're assuming they're going to move up right now into the playoff or into the top 4 with Michigan losing this past week to Ohio State. I would say Ohio State obviously needs to lose to Northwestern in order for UCF to get in. And then Oklahoma would have to lose to Texas. But then that leaves an intriguing possibility of there are rumors of I don't see a 2-loss team getting in, but what if we get a couple of these 3-loss conference champions? Could possibly see Texas, could possibly see maybe a Washington, could possibly jump their way up there maybe. But yeah, a lot of things would have to happen for UCF to get consideration, but it's just so hard now with the fact that McKenzie Milton is basically done for the year. But if I had to pick a game to keep an eye out for, I want to say watch out for Northwestern. This team, they're winning games and they're winning close games, which doesn't stick out as much for Northwestern. But you look at, they played Michigan super close. They played them to the end. They beat Wisconsin. Yes, they've been down this year, but they did beat
Wisconsin anymore.
Very true. They beat Iowa on the road. Like I said, a lot of these wins that they've had are close. They have a very solid veteran quarterback in Clayton Thornton. I think that they can pull an upset this upcoming week. It's just a matter of if their defense can contain Dwayne Haskins, because we saw him tear apart the best defense in the country this past week. So that game, I think, is going to be the one to watch out for, because if Ohio State wins, it's going to be another one of those, if the rankings go accordingly, do they sneak in or does the Big Ten get left out?
I think, first of all, I want to talk about Northwestern a little bit. I get your argument simply because Purdue did beat Ohio State, and Purdue is not as good as Northwestern, and Maryland almost kind of should have actually beaten Ohio State, and they are not nearly as good as Northwestern. But when you look at Northwestern and the season that they've had, they started off 1-3 with that one loss was to Michigan there, but 2 of their losses were to Duke and to Akron. So that does not scream to me a team that is capable of dealing with Ohio State and beating them. But like you said,
start of the year. Teams evolve.
Start of the year, yeah, but that's still Akron. Akron and Duke. Those are not good teams. I don't see how they could have gotten that much better since then. And then they lost to Notre Dame 31-21. I think that Ohio State's better than Notre Dame. I think a lot of teams are better than Notre Dame, but they have, I guess, played pretty well recently. They beat Iowa. I don't know how good Iowa is, but I think at this point Notre Dame obviously is a lock. I think Alabama, no matter what they do, is a lock. I think if Ohio State wins, they're a lock simply because they beat Michigan, which is going to be the best win between them and Oklahoma. And then I think Clemson, obviously, if they win, they're a lock. So I think if those four teams, or those three teams plus Notre Dame win, I think they're in. I don't think there's much of an argument.
Can we just have Notre Dame play UCF and just see what happens?
I mean, was it Georgia last year UCF beat? I forget which team.
Auburn.
Auburn, yeah, they beat Auburn last year, which was impressive. So they're clearly capable of beating these good teams in the SEC. So I think that would be entertaining.
I always wonder, like, when you have look at a team like UCF and someone's like, oh, well, they haven't played anyone good. Like, is it the school that makes their own schedule? Like, can you
to some degree?
Can a UCF go out and be like, hey, Alabama, let's schedule a game?
They can try, but a lot of the power teams aren't really interested in playing them because they don't want to lose and look bad. So, like, if you look who they scheduled UConn, who they beat, like, what is that, 56-17. They tried to play UNC, but that game got canceled. They beat Pitt 45-14, which was significantly better than Notre Dame played Pitt. So they went out and they scheduled some teams, and now Pitt's actually ranked. But it just wasn't – I mean, they played Navy too, and they beat Navy, and they were ranked for a while. But it just doesn't amount to the type of wins that they see fit.
Yeah, and the tough part about scheduling higher opponents is typically a lot of this has to be done in like 5 years in advance. So if you are picking at some of these opponents that you're expecting to be good and suddenly they don't recruit well or struggle, then those games don't turn out as well as you would expect. So that's part of it. And also part of it is sometimes when you sign these contracts to play games, sometimes they're like home and home. And typically that has to be scheduled out 10 years in advance. So that's why it's just hitting UCF in a bad spot. You look at 5 years from now, maybe even sooner, they're going to get these big, good games. It's just going to be a matter of if they're still going to be talented.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you raised. And just looking at their schedule, I think they actually have a lot of wins that ended up being pretty good. Like I said, that Pitt win looks pretty good now. They beat Cincinnati when Cincinnati was ranked. They beat Navy. And those are three teams that are and have been ranked this year. So they beat South Carolina State too. So like they have some teams on there that are decent that they've beaten. And so it's not like they've played absolutely nobody. Like they might have a better schedule when you look at it than Notre Dame, because Notre Dame had the opposite happen where they had a bunch of teams that were supposed to be good that ended up being bad, basically. But I think there's a genuine argument for UCF to get in, but I think the Milton injury really hampers that chance.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in all those games. UCF plays Memphis in their conference championship game. So as long as they win, they'll obviously stay in the conversation, but it's going to be tough for them to sneak in with all these other games. But let's get back to some NFL talk. So it's time to talk about the upcoming week in the NFL. We're at, I believe it's week 13 now. So we're at that point of the year where it's close to the playoffs, especially for fantasy football. But let's talk about some of the games so far. So, Ryan and Derek, what is your game of the week this week?
For me, it's a game that we've actually mentioned several times already, and that is the Chargers and the Steelers. So this is a primetime game that is going to be very entertaining because these teams are in the thick of fighting for positioning in the AFC playoff picture. The Steelers look like they're pretty firmly in control of their division. The Chargers actually still have a chance at the division, even though the Chiefs have been playing very well, and at least are trying to hold on to that fifth spot, first wild card. So this is going to be an entertaining matchup between two quarterbacks that were in the same draft class and are kind of in a similar spot in their career where it could be winding down. They might only have 1 to 2 more years left, so they have to take advantage of what they have. What's going to be key for the Chargers is how their running backs handle playing with Melvin Gordon being sidelined for at least 2 weeks with that knee injury.
Yeah, definitely. Derek, would you agree, or do you think you have a different game in mind?
I think that's definitely a good game to watch, but for me, I'm going to go with Dallas and New Orleans. On a Yahoo Sports for their Pro Football Pick'em, 57% of people picked Dallas to win that game. And I think it'll be a good test for the Saints to see if they can kind of keep going. And it's definitely a game that the Cowboys, probably need to win here. And so I think with that, Ezekiel Elliott versus Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, kind of like ground game, and then seeing Drew Brees and Dak Prescott, how they both go against each other. There's just a lot of talent in the game, and I think it'll be a good test for both teams to kind of see where they are here as we move forward into the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely. That'll be a huge game. Dallas is playing a lot better now offensively since they've gotten Amari Cooper. And they do have a tough matchup, but it is a home game for them, so that definitely does give them an advantage. The game I'm looking at, I'm going to Foxborough. I think the Patriots and Vikings can be a big game. I think this could be a shootout scoring game. Vikings coming off of a big win. They desperately needed a win to get back into the playoff hunt as they are right now in the playoff picture. But it is a road game, so that'll be a tough one for them as well. But Kirk Cousins played phenomenal against the Packers. So if he can do that against the Patriots, which I would say similar, maybe a little less of a solid defensive team, could put up similar numbers. It could possibly be an upgrade.
That's a good pick, Ian. I think that the 3 games that we picked are definitely all going to be interesting. They have big-time playoff implications, so definitely will be interesting to see how all 3 of those play out. Let's go to our upset pick of the week. And, Ian, you selected yours correctly last week with the Cleveland Browns beating the Cincinnati Bengals. And I almost looked like a genius picking the Giants over the Eagles, but then they found a way to botch it. Between the 3 of us, I think they might just be tanking to get a high draft pick. I don't really know. I think they just tried to screw me over there.
Yeah, definitely. So looking at the results, I now move a game ahead of you, Ryan, in the standings. However, we do not have the best record overall. Our best record goes to our guest, Neil Johnson. Neil Johnson had the 1 correct pick of our guests of all this week. So, Derek, it's all up to you to keep the perfect streak going. So who's on upset alert this week?
Oh, geez, the perfect streak is on the line?
The perfect streak of 1 game. You don't want to mess that up.
Perfect streak of 1 game. I'm gonna go Chargers here. I gotta stick with my
you did say it
my
earlier.
bold prediction, so I'm going Chargers over the Steelers.
Yeah, definitely. Chargers are playing well. They do have probably this would be their biggest game of the season. It's a primetime game, so I definitely think they're going to come out for this game even without Melvin Gordon. Ryan, who do you have for you?
So I'm looking at a team that's been super disappointing the whole year. They're supposed to lose by 2 points. And that's the Atlanta Falcons. They're playing at Mercedes-Benz Stadium versus the Baltimore Ravens. I feel like this team is just too talented to let many more of these games go that they should be able to win. They're 4-7. I think they're due in a game that we could see Lamar Jackson starting, and it could be that he's going to run out of luck facing a team that is slightly better on defense than the 2 he's played so far.
Or he could find some luck versus a team that's trying to get some draft picks.
That's true. They could try to screw me over again. You're right there. But I'm going to go with the Falcons. I think Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, and the crew are too good to stay this far down for this long.
Yeah, they do have a tough matchup against Baltimore and their strong defense, but Matt Ryan can definitely keep him in the game, especially with Julio Jones. I'm going to the primetime game on Thursday this week. I'm going with the Cowboys over the Saints. Cowboys have looked completely different these last few weeks since they've gotten Amari Cooper. Ezekiel Elliott is running the ball and getting the ball many touches these last few weeks. He's keeping me alive in one of my fantasy leagues. So I'm riding the Cowboys. I think they get a big win. They stay atop the NFC East. And the Saints slip, which could mean the Rams move up to the top. Okay.
I just don't like the Cowboys as much as you guys like the Cowboys, because look at that schedule here now. They lost to the Titans after losing the Redskins, 2 teams that are average at best. Then they barely beat the Eagles, not a good team. They barely beat the Falcons, not a good team. And then they slid past the Redskins without their starting quarterback. So their last 3 wins, while they are indeed wins, have not by any means been impressive. So I think the Cowboys are one of those teams that generally looks completely different when they play a team that's garbage compared to when they play a team that's actually good, which has been the trend that they've had all year with their schedule, where any team that has a winning record usually beats them. Any team that doesn't usually loses.
Yeah, but you have to admit, earlier in the year they were losing to bad teams, and now they're beating bad teams, and so they're definitely on the rise
earlier in the year.
Well, I would argue the Texans aren't a very good team.
The Texans have a winning record; they're 7-3.
I would argue the Titans aren't a very good team.
They're 8-3 now. They got a big one this Monday night.
Yeah, they're 8-3.
Panthers aren't a very good team.
Well, now they're playing worse teams. Do you like that? You happy?
It doesn't, like, if a team is beating bad teams at the end of the year and they get their confidence up, that could be a huge boost when you actually do play a good team. It's kind of like a fake until you make it there.
But listen to this. You have Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram going against Ezekiel Elliott. We'll call that one a wash. Fair?
No.
You and
Mark Ingram and
I'm saying,
Kamara,
like,
I
we'll
think
call
they're
it
better than Elliott.
Well, okay. And then you have Drew Brees versus Dak Prescott.
Hey, I'm not. I
then you have
I
that
didn't
Saints
pick. I
defense.
didn't pick the Dallas to win here.
Yeah, this will be something I have to see. It's the early game this week, so we'll know by Friday if it was a good pick and if Dallas is starting to look like a better team. But let's move on to some fantasy sports. So, like I say, it's the week before the playoffs for most leagues. So, who's the guy that you must add this week to save your playoff hopes?
As far as like a pickup goes, or just someone?
Yeah,
who's
waiver wire. No waiver wire.
Well, I think if Josh Adams is somehow still available in your league, you got to pick him up. He had a monster 2 weeks here, and it was kind of in that limbo with Philly's running game where it was like, oh, is like Wendell Smallwood the guy now, and like there was no real viable option, and he's been the guy who's just kind of come to the top, and he's like, really claimed it as like I'm the like fantasy option here, like I'm the guy. So if he's available somehow, pick up Josh Adams.
Yeah, very good option. I know I watched him in one of my leagues a couple weeks ago. He's been sitting on my bench because I have some good backs, but after last week, I might put him in my lineup. But Brian, who do you have this week?
So I'm going outside the box, and I'm going with a tight end selection that you should definitely get if you don't have one already. And there's really two that you can look at if you need a viable tight end option. The first one's going to be Jack Doyle from the Colts. Andrew Luck has been on such fire lately that whoever plays tight end and is the starting tight end is getting looks. So before it was Eric Ebron, you remember when he had that 3-touchdown performance. Now it looks like most of that attention is going to Jack Doyle. So he got, I believe it was around 9 points last week. So he's a solid play at tight end. Another guy is Cameron Brate, who's taking over for O.J. Howard. Now, he and Jameis Winston for a while have had pretty good chemistry, and it looks like that's going to continue as he also got a pretty decent point total this week in relief of Howard, who's on IR. So he's going to be the guy going forward, whereas before those two were sharing snaps.
Yeah, definitely a couple of good options. I know I had started Evan Ingram this week, and I didn't find out until the game was already started that he was a last-minute scratch. So a couple weeks I'm desperately looking for a tight end. So I'm actually have to look at getting one of those guys.
Didn't Ebron score a touchdown last week too?
Yeah,
but he's still getting attention.
He's sort of the second option, but he's still fantasy viable just because of the season that he's had. He's been very good this year.
Yeah, very true. Looking at a guy who I would add, I would say looking at the Colts, I would go with Naheem Hines. Marlon Mack left this past week with a concussion. You look at Hines, he's more of a dual threat back out of the backfield. So he can not only run the ball on the outside, but he can also catch the ball. I would say he definitely is a better option than other back on the team, Jordan Wilkins, who will get some touches, I believe. It looks like they will split, but if you're looking at Andrew Luck, who's been dominant these past few weeks throwing the ball, I think that Hines is the guy you get because he's the guy that's going to catch the ball out of the backfield.
Yeah, that's definitely a great pickup because, like you said, Marlon Mack, concussion protocol, no idea how long that's going to take. But that brings us to our time. So, Ian, is there anything you want to say to everybody before we let them go?
Just want to thank everyone again for listening to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesday, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I want to thank your brother Derek for coming on this week, giving us some talk on football, making it a little more interesting with a brother-to-brother connection going on right there. But I do also want to point out that you can listen to us each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker, or if you do want to listen to us live on YouTube, you can do that when we do record each week. Also, make sure to give us a like and a follow on our Facebook and YouTube, or Facebook and Twitter pages. We continue to get more and more likes and follows each week. We're getting close to 100 likes on Facebook. So if you follow us on Twitter, just search Touchdown Tuesdays on Facebook and give us a like there. Well, if you haven't followed us on Twitter, give us a follow at the handle at TDWN2's podcast. And again, just want to thank everyone for listening this week. And yeah, for all you fantasy owners, best of luck as the fantasy football playoffs are just around the corner.
Yep, and also check out Bruce Sports' new NBA podcast, Run It Back, also with Sam Valenti and Eric Klamrowski. They are pretty passionate about basketball, so that's always interesting to listen to as well. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great week.